I read Marcus Aurelius, one of the lessons I take away, if you're not familiar, Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, one of the lessons I take away is the world is ever changing. And we have a sense that the world is changing more frequently, more quickly these days. And it should cause us to think about the nature of our business in this dynamic world. And so I'd like to spend some time talking about what that means for us as we think about competitions, as we rethink competitions. What do we mean by competitions? I'd like to start with a couple examples. A couple examples to frame what we're thinking when you look at the current military situation in Ukraine. That situation in Ukraine is defined militarily, but it's also defined by the initial conditions under which the Russians crossed the border on February 24th. In fact, you could go back to 2008 when Russia invaded the Republic of Georgia, and to 2014, 2015 when they entered Donbass and Crimea. But it wasn't just the military aspects that defines this, it's also the economics in terms of the oil and natural gas that is needed by Europe. It's also financial in terms of our sanctions, and our trade sanctions in terms of our technologies that our sanctions seek to deny Russia. That is the larger, complex, dynamic environment that defines the military space. And so as we look at the actions of China, it causes us concern. Let me be the first to say we don't seek crisis in the Pacific, but we're aware that the actions in the Pacific become the initial conditions for any crisis at a time and place that we don't get to choose. And so Chinese actions for example, in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, create local infrastructure that is beneficial to host nations on some accounts, but it also creates a complex weave of interdependencies economically, diplomatically, in terms of information as well. And those are the initial conditions for any military crisis. And so we wonder the ramifications of these contests. I want to get a bit more specific from those examples. I want to give you two ways in which we are framing this to try to appreciate DARPA's role and the role of technology in rethinking competitions. First is that these competitions occur somewhere, and these locations lend themselves to gray zone competition because these locations cannot reject the foreign influence that is often thrust upon them. And also, these competitions occur over a long period of time. And so the local dynamics are very fast, but the competition unfolds over a long time. We believe that creates an environment that challenges our current approach to decision-making and requires us to think about a different metaphor for decision-making, one that requires constant engagement. And when you're constantly engaged, then there are certain dynamics that fundamentally change. When you are engaged in the environment, then your actions cause local effects. And so you are part of the dynamic of this competition. And so when we look at other domains where this is an essential element of the environment, we see this exists in multiple domains, in multiple fields. I like to think at DARPA you don't really know anything unless you can prove it in multiple domains. And so everywhere from biology to economics to system ID and control systems, we see a dawning opportunity where we take some local action, sense the local response, decide, and then perhaps we have to adapt as a result. But I prefer to look backwards and say, let's start from this side. What are our own intuitions? Because very often our own intuitions are wrong. Very often, particularly in complex adaptive spaces, our intuitions are wrong. So let's try to challenge our intuitions, enumerate them, then decide what we could sense that would cause us to change our intuitions, and then decide what actions we might take that cause us to sense it such that we can understand what intuitions, hypotheses cause us to adapt. So we see multiple opportunities when we apply this metaphor for national security, but it seems still perhaps qualitative, not quantitative. But I do believe that we can measure our objectives, and our objectives are to maintain our freedom of access and freedom of action. And just recently we see in the Solomon Islands an inability, a lack of freedom of access and freedom of action that we most recently had. And so we think in multiple domains there are ways that we can determine whether we have the freedom of access and freedom of action that is essential for us to maintain our engagement locally and with our partners and allies, because our partners and allies are truly our national strength. So much more to discuss. I would love to do so with you. If you would consider meeting me at the DARPA timeline during a break, I would love to explore this topic more broadly with you. Thanks sincerely.